The US dollar has served as the world reserve currency for many, many years, and if anything, decades and decades now throughout world history. But the big idea is that today, however, in modern history, it is now speculated that it is going to potentially now in the future lose its power as the powerhouse and center of the universe in terms of the power of the US dollar right now. The big idea behind this is that there are many reasons for this. We try not to take sides, so objectively speaking, just objectively speaking, there are a lot of people that believe that Trump's policies is one of the reasons why this is going to happen, especially a lot of the policies centered around his tariffs. And the big idea is that there's also a lot of talks in media outlets right now really talking about how potentially China is going to be dumping the US dollar to help influence, or to simply put, to impact why what's going on is going on right now. If this sounds a little bit confusing, the big idea is that in today's video, what I really want to talk about is basically to clarify the situation of what's happening right now in our history, in just our economy, the world right now with the US dollar, its powerhouse, whether or not it's truly going to be de-dollarized, what's the story with China dumping US dollars in general. I'm hoping to hopefully we can clarify all of that in today's video. So with that being said, let's just get right to this video. But as always, if you guys enjoy videos like this, before we begin, like. If you guys want to share some support, comment, feel free to leave a comment about anything, and consider subscribing and hitting the bell, because today's video is obviously going to be focused on China and the US dollar, but perhaps in the future we might be making other videos talking about other areas of our economy and maybe exploring other countries as well, because there's a lot of other countries that are now going to potentially be dumping the US dollar if what news outlets say really end up coming true. Of course, it's going to make a lot more sense by the end of this video. So with that being said, let's get started. So to start this video, we really have to talk a little bit about the background story to how we got to where we are today. Essentially, the story is that for many, many years and decades now, the US dollar served as the world reserve currency, which what that basically just means, long story short, is that it was considered the gold standard and the currency that other countries, foreign countries in general, had to use in order to conduct trade when it came to exchanging goods or anything in that world. So whether or not we were talking about exchanging oil, goods, trade, product, materials, anything in that particular world, the US dollar was considered the standard that they basically used in order to conduct trade that a lot of countries relied on for many, many different reasons, which we might discuss in a little bit. But the idea really is that now we have to flash forward a little bit into the future, talking about in modern day, which is really about the fact that earlier this year, as some of you guys probably already know if you guys have been following this channel by now, if you guys haven't, maybe consider subscribing if you guys are brand new here. But the idea really is that President Donald Trump essentially started to implement a 145, I repeat, a 145% tariff against China for everything that's going on there right now. And China also happened to be essentially one of the few, if not basically the few countries that he didn't end up postponing his tariffs. As some of you guys know, is that earlier this month, or earlier April if you're watching this in the future, because this video is still going to be very relevant even in May and in the coming months. But the idea really is that earlier in the month of April, he decided to do his reciprocal tariffs on a lot of different countries. But because he saw how it was impacting the economy, he ended up deciding to postpone most of his tariffs for most countries. China was not one of those countries that ended up being able to experience that postponement and situation. So what's going on right now is that China is essentially retaliating against everything that the US is doing, and one of the ways that it's doing it is by attacking, or simply put, trying to do things now towards the US dollar. So why this is very, very impactful and why this is important is that because essentially the story right now is that following the fact that the US imposed that 145% tariff, what it essentially did is that it convinced China to sell off a huge portion of its US Treasuries to no longer have to rely on the US as its main currency for trade. Other countries are expected to follow as well. But it's just obviously this video is specifically focused about China, which is why, we probably will make maybe a future video talking about other countries as well. So definitely consider subscribing if you guys haven't done so already. But this video is going to be focused on China. Now, there are several benefits that we have to mention to being the world reserve currency that the US was able to really take advantage of over the last couple of years/decades. Essentially, by being the world reserve currency, it gave the US a lot of power, obviously. It also helped to lower borrowing costs towards foreign countries. So why is what is happening right now happening right now? Essentially, it's that because right now inside of our country, so specifically inside the United States of America, we're going through a lot of debt, a massive debt crisis, where there's just a lot of different poor financial decisions that we have made over the years that is helping, or that is simply put impacting and influencing the fact that we might potentially be losing our powerhouse inside of the world. And then most of all, what we have to talk about and really focus on today is going to be all about President Donald Trump's tariffs, because the tariffs are one of the biggest reasons why China really felt like they had to retaliate to begin with, because they felt very, very attacked because of what happened by Donald Trump's tariffs. Again, just objectively speaking, regardless of your political views, it's just physically what is happening right now. People use the US dollar as essentially a way to make exchanges, but the idea is that it really starts with the Treasuries. So in other words, what this really means is that when people conduct trade using the US dollar, what they really do is that they're essentially exchanging the treasuries to help supplement and trade all of the goods that we currently have inside of our country. That's so things that are coming in and out of our country. If you sell treasuries, what it's ultimately going to do is that it's essentially going to crash the market. Very, very similar to what happens if you end up selling stock, except in this case, we're talking about treasuries. When you have something, if you follow the stock market called a sell-off, that's essentially a situation where people do a massive, sell-off of just stocks, and that's what's going to potentially crash the prices of stocks. Treasuries are a little bit similar in that sense, in the sense that because when you end up having a massive sell-off, or in this case China dumping the US dollar, what is really going on is essentially is that they are selling a massive percentage of the US treasuries that they currently own, which is going to crash the price of treasuries. Now, why is this important to us and why should we care about this? And this is the part that's going to be important, is that because essentially when you sell a lot of treasuries, in order to make up for the fact that the prices are going to crash, what's ultimately going to happen is that they're going to increase the interest rates. They're going to increase the borrowing rates of doing that. So why this is important is that, long story short, is that the synopsis and simple way to put it is that when you do all of these things, what's ultimately going to happen is that by increasing interest rates, or simply put, by selling treasuries, which will ultimately increase interest rates, what's going to happen is that it's going to make it a lot harder for American citizens, so people like you and I, to borrow money. That's why it is very, very impactful, because if it ultimately ends up making it more difficult for us to borrow money, it means that things are going to be getting a lot more expensive. Why this is related is that, say, for example, you want to take out a mortgage to buy a house, right? Well, now the interest rate on that mortgage is going to be higher, which means that the power of the dollar is not going to be as strong, because you're going to need more of it in order to purchase things. It means that, for example, a house that you used to be able to afford that might cost $250,000 is now going to cost a lot more money when you factor in the fact that there's going to be higher interest rates now to that mortgage. And this is just one example, because this can be extended to a lot of different things. Things such as like college loans, auto loans, borrowing money in general, taking out a business loan, right? Businesses are going to potentially struggle, because a lot of businesses in the beginning, for a lot of businesses to run, they operate on loans. There's a lot of businesses that when they start in the beginning, they have to borrow money in order to fund the startup costs to run that particular business. But if all of this stuff happens, the interest rates are going to go up and things are going to become a lot more expensive, which is definitely, of course, going to impact inflation even further than what we have already experienced right now in our current country. Just by seeing how crazy the prices have hiked up with the US dollar and everything going on in that world. So what should we do as just regular everyday people inside of our country right now to kind of protect ourselves from this? Well, I would probably say, and this is the part that's a little bit opinionated because everyone is going to have a different take on it. So hopefully maybe this is something that will make this video a little bit original, even if you've seen another video about this. But the idea is that the opinions, if you just look around right now, are a little bit all over the place. But I would probably say the big idea in terms of what you should do to protect yourself and prepare for this is really to diversify your assets. There's a lot of people that are talking about how you can potentially buy gold and silver. That is something you can consider. I don't think it's necessary in my opinion. Again, that's why I say this is a little bit of an opinionated side because every single person is going to have a different viewpoint. Very similar to if you ask people, like what should you do about the stock market? There's going to be some people that say to sell. There's going to be some people that say to buy, and there's going to be other people that say to hold. But my personal opinion about the situation is that if you're trying to protect yourself from everything happening, it's going to be very important to diversify your assets. So what that means is that maybe you can consider, instead of just buying stocks, to just spread it so that you're buying stocks in different industries within the stock market. You can look into buying crypto. You can look into buying gold and silver, as we've just mentioned. You can look into investing in the real estate and the housing market. I will note though is that right now at this time, the housing market is obviously at all-time highs. Things are very, very expensive. So I don't necessarily recommend the housing market for most people. Unless you have a lot of money you're prepared to park, then you can look into investing in real estate to diversify your asset. But that's really the most important thing I think that every single person should really be doing right now to protect yourself from all of the stuff happening. Essentially, the one word, the key word, is to diversify and spread apart. That's probably the biggest, most important thing. But to maybe conclude this by finally just answering the most common question, or the question that a lot of people had by probably watching this video, is really about whether or not China is really truly dumping the US dollar. And the answer is kind of. So the answer is it's that they are planning to dump the US dollar because they don't want to rely on the US dollar, for a lot of the things that are happening. But because at the very end of the day, the US dollar is still considered a massive powerhouse and still to this very, very day, the reserve currency in our country, it means that yes, China is going to potentially dump the US dollar, but it's not going to be an instant process. It's going to be something that's very, very gradual that they might potentially build up for it. And so will the US become de-dollarized? The answer is potentially yes. But I would probably say not in the near future, at least. It's going to take a little bit of time to do it. It's going to be a very gradual process. But if you've just followed just general history in general, a lot of currencies ultimately just end up losing their power eventually, and things have to just replace itself not over and over again, but certainly just throughout history over time. And it's just natural. This is just part of just what it means to be a country in our American, well, just not just in American, but in our world history. And I think that's probably going to be the biggest takeaway from everything that we've mentioned in today's video. So with that being said, that's pretty much what I really just wanted to cover in today's video. So if you found that relatively insightful, thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. Feel free to leave a comment, thoughts, questions, suggestions about anything. Always open to hearing from you guys. Consider subscribing, hitting the bell. Remember to smash the like button if you guys haven't done so to share support. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.